still hear them, the distant drums of war, echoes from a time when brother fought brother, and the fate of a nation hung by a thread. This is the Distant Drums Podcast, history you can march to.
James and Andrew here with the Distant Drums Podcast. We're continuing our march through the American Civil War, joined today by a fellow history content creator. His page is a page that I visit frequently because of his animated maps. If you want to know where certain regiments fought at a certain battle, this is the channel that I would highly recommend. I use it quite frequently for my own studies. So Andrew, go ahead and introduce Mr. Dr. Lucas Wilder.
Absolutely, and I've had the pleasure of chatting with Dr. Wilder a few times, but Dr. Lucas Wilder received his bachelor's degree from Lincoln Memorial University, his master's degree from East Tennessee State University, and his PhD from Mississippi State University. Raised in the Appalachian Mountains, he developed an enduring interest in the region's past, particularly its Civil War history. His research centers on the evolution of mountain warfare with a focus on the repeated invasions and contested occupation of East Tennessee. By situating military operations within the Appalachian environment, Wilder examines how terrain, climate, and geography shape strategic decision-making and influence the success and failure of Civil War campaigns. Wilder has served as an interpretive ranger with the National Park Service for over 16 years. He is also the creator of the YouTube channel History Gone Wilder, a growing platform dedicated to bringing academic history to a wider audience. Through animated battle maps, book reviews, interviews, and in-depth analysis, Wilder bridges the gap between scholarship and public history. With more than 800 videos, over 1 million hours of watch time, and 8 million views and counting, his work continues to make the complexities of the past both accessible and compelling. Dr. Wilder, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much. I'm honored to be here. I'm always happy when I get to talk about the Civil War. I do all day long, and I come home and I still talk about it.
Absolutely, and I'd like to say I'm in the, even just virtually, I'm in the room with two of some of the best Civil War content creators out there. So we really appreciate what you do, and it's fascinating work that you do as well, especially with the maps. And we'll dive into that here in a little bit, I'm sure.
Yeah, Dr. Lucas, thank you for your time. When I create my own content, and obviously you're gathering research and things of that nature, I find myself gravitating towards your channel because it's one thing to see maps in a book, but when you see those maps come to life, animations, and then you go to the spot where those regiments were, it's different pieces of the puzzle, and your channel has helped me immensely, especially with Chickamauga. That is just a chaotic battle. So kind of seeing some of those movements kind of helped me stay oriented.
Chickamauga is a slugfest, and just very similar to Shiloh, where the armies just hit and hit and hit, and it's just battering one after another. And so it was fun to animate Chickamauga. All of them are fun in their own ways, but Chickamauga was one of my favorites to animate. The entire Chickamauga campaign, because I extended it. I went beyond Chickamauga and went all the way through the Chattanooga campaign and moving on towards the Atlanta campaign and finished up with Hood's Tennessee campaign. So I'm actually in the middle, at the beginning stages of finishing up the Gettysburg campaign. I'm about 10 weeks ahead of what you see on the channel. Okay. And so Gettysburg is getting ready to be wrapped up, and I'm starting the Kentucky campaign.
Oh, wow.
And it'll go into Stones River. And at that point, I will have done the entire Western theater from the battles around Cumberland Gap and the capture of Columbus, Kentucky in mid 61, all the way up to Hood's Tennessee campaign.
That's
I will
fantastic.
Have it all completed.
Yeah, especially, with the Western theater, I feel like it's always kind of taken a back burner to the Eastern theater. So it's really nice to have a resource to learn from the Western theater.
Yeah, that's one thing I was brought into the Western theater by Earl Hess. I don't know if you know him at all, but he's the prolific writer that keeps putting out books. Even though he's retired, he's putting out a book a year about the war. And I had him as a professor at Lincoln Memorial University, and I was always an Eastern theater person. And then he switched me over. He converted me to a Western theater, and I've been in the Western theater the rest of my life, at least what I write about. Although we can talk about this professionally in academia, I'm actually breaking out of the Western theater, not totally, but breaking out and looking in different theaters for some research, and I'll talk about that a little bit later.
Yeah, absolutely. So one of the things that we like to ask, just to kind of get things rolling here, what was your spark? What was that one moment or moments that really got your interest rolling in the American Civil War?
Ooh, that's a good question, and
Yeah.
one it takes a little bit of time, so bear with me.
Sure.
My love of history came about because my papa, my dad's dad, was in World War II, and he was a very old soldier. He was 29 when he went into the army to fight. And I remember sitting in the floor at his house and hearing him tell stories about World War II, and my dad asking him stories about it. And so that kind of started my interest in history. Then when I was 10, my mom and dad did something they probably never should have done. They took me to watch the movie The Patriot at 10 years old, all the blood and gore. But I absolutely fell in love with linear battle lines. It just fascinated me to know to the nth degree of men marching into battle shoulder to shoulder, firing their muskets. And then when I was in 6th grade, my teacher in 6th grade. I'd waited years to have this man. He was the most respected teacher there, and he was the most fun too. And he passed away actually in front of the students.
Oh, geez.
Like I said, not the prettiest story, but he passed away. And the man that took his place for 6 weeks was the gentleman who kind of went around to schools and talked about history and tried to get kids involved. And so you can imagine that it was a lot of history, and I don't remember anything of the math or anything else we did, but I remember the history stories. And we started talking about Custer's Last Stand. And I started getting deep into Custer, and I started reading as much as I could at 11 years old and watching the movies, every movie that they made about Custer. And then I realized that was the end, but what was the beginning of Custer? And I started looking into the Civil War, and that's where it all went to. And it's been obsession ever since.
Yeah. It sounds like we're around the same age. Do you remember Civil War combat growing up?
I didn't have the channel.
Oh,
yeah, I didn't have the channel.
Have you at least gone back and watched them on YouTube?
I did, yeah.
Oh, man,
I went back and watched it. But
those are phenomenal, and they age so well. Like, you can watch them now, although they're not in HD, but they're really good with firsthand accounts. Of course, you have some of the historians providing context. They're phenomenal.
Yeah, and like I said, I didn't have much access to the different channels. I was very, very, very basic cable, and so I didn't get to watch all the good history documentaries until a little bit later. But I was lucky enough to have a wonderful dad that was a huge history buff, and he fostered that. He kept it going, kept the flame going in my life with it.
Going into your career, you followed history all the way through, correct?
Yeah, it was a history degree all the way through. I never had any. I did at the very beginning of my academic career think I was going to go into IT and computer information systems. I thought that would be a job that would never go away, which it hasn't. It will not go away. But I realized that wasn't going to be for me. I had the thought. It was more than a thought. I never pursued it in college, but it was history the whole way. And I realized early on I didn't really want to teach high school. Those people are saints that can teach high school, because I can't do that. I can't do that with smaller kids. I need a student with a foundation of historical knowledge for me to build on. I don't want to set the foundation. So I rely on a lot of people to do that. And when I got into college, I was like, this is exactly what I want to do. I want to teach students. So I've been teaching as an adjunct professor for almost 10 years now, but I've been teaching classes for various schools since 2014.
Wow.
And so that got me started academically. I don't know if we want to jump into YouTube just yet, unless you got more questions about academics.
Yeah, and I wanted to stem off that a little bit because, as your bio mentioned, you focus a lot on the climate of the Civil War. Kind of take us through that a little bit. That's something that I feel like we as history lovers, we don't realize about how the weather affected battles during the Civil War.
Yeah, his name is Jack Temple Kirby. This gentleman was instrumental in getting environmental history and Civil War history together. As he said, military historians do environmental history. It was just not called environmental history because when you talk about battles, you have to talk about the weather.
Yeah.
You have to talk about the sun beating down. You have to talk about the terrain, the geography of the areas. So especially military historians have always, in a sense, done environmental history. And when I was going for my master's, I was trying to figure out what was going to be my niche. And my advisor was a Civil War environmental historian. And I really took to it. I found that was a way to bridge a gap between people who like science and people who like history. You can combine them both and talk about science and history together because they're linked. When you talk about any kind of history, it's hard to do without talking about the environment in which it happened. And so that got me onto that idea. And I was like, there's nothing more impressive than the Appalachian Mountains to me in history because it had so many connotations as being a barrier for people moving west. And then once the Civil War takes place, people are trying to navigate these mountains, or these generals are, and they don't know how. They've never encountered anything quite like this. They did a little bit in the Mexican War, but nothing to that extent. And not that you're fighting in the mountains, which even scared many men. And that's what I started realizing when I was doing my research, and I kind of got drawn to environmental history, was the environment played a significant role, particularly in the Western theater, but all the theaters, but particularly in the Western theater when it comes to mountains and rivers. They played such a significant role especially for invasions of Union armies, because my favorite historian, or at least my favorite historical author, is Richard McMurray. And he wrote a book called Two Great Rebel Armies. And I advise it for anyone. If you've never read Two Great Rebel Armies, read it. It is the best Civil War book I have ever read. And I use it all the time. Every time I write something down for academia, I always go back to that book. But he really hit it home for me when he said the Western theater was much more conducive for Union invasions than the Eastern theater. And it plays out exactly the way he says, because you've got the Tennessee, you've got the Cumberland rivers that just make inroads into the South. And with the Union having steamboats and a great fleet, a brownwater navy, it was easier to take the Western theater than it would be the Eastern theater. So it just spiraled. Once my advisor kind of told me what environmental history was, I took a few classes with him. I was like, this is what I want to do. And as Kenneth Noe, the great historian, said, if you didn't realize it, the Civil War happened outside.
That's a very keen observation.
It is, but people don't realize it.
Yeah.
People talk about the war as if it didn't.
Yes.
And so I like reminding people. It's a funny little line he has in his book, The Howling Storm.
When you mention the weather and environmental factors, think about the men in these battles, whether it's, Stones River, it's nasty, wet, cold, or currently running a series on Gettysburg. Think about the 15th Alabama off the top of my head. How long did those guys go without a sip of water?
Yeah, some of the best examples of how we impact the environment is after the Battle of Shiloh. It's a very rural area and still is a rural area. And so at the very end of my animated battle map that just wrapped up a few weeks ago for Shiloh, the people come back and they realize they can't farm the land. There's artillery shells in their fields. They can hit those. They possibly could explode, but it was difficult to farm the areas. The ground was full of lead. They couldn't saw the trees down because the trees were full of lead. And so it was a barren landscape afterward. because you couldn't do anything on it. And then after the Battle of Antietam, the Union Army stays on the battlefield for a long time. And I love telling my students and other people, and I might get the numbers just slightly wrong, but bear with me. They had a horse will urinate about 3 gallons of urine a day and about 30 to 35 pounds of excrement. And there's a wonderful little environmental history about how all that went into the groundwater, and the people around Sharpsburg, Maryland became extremely sick afterwards.
Wow.
And it just wrecked their entire environment. And so it took a long time for the ground to repair itself in that area. So we talk about the cost of war, but when we look at environmental history, we can really explore how it impacted the people that were not involved. That's just the regular citizens that had to go back to these landscapes that were destroyed.
What kind of steered you into the direction of YouTube?
I was with the Park Service, I was on a tour, and I had this family say, "You have a great voice. Do you do radio? Do you do this?" I was like, "No, I never have." And I have a lot of people tell me they like my stories, and they said, "You should try a YouTube channel. It might benefit you a little bit." And so I just started it up. I intended, my very first video I ever did was simply taking a historical journal article and explaining it in easy terms, because historians like using big words, and it's not easy for the general public to read, or it's too dry for them to read. So I tried to make it a little bit peppier, a little bit unique, and it's like, I'm going to try to bridge that gap. And that's where it started. It was very easy, very simplistic explanation, but someone said, "Hey, you got a good voice." And I said, "I'll try." And here we go. And it's blossomed into a huge YouTube channel compared to what it started out being.
Now, as far as like the animated maps, what spurred you to shift gears to that?
I love maps. I am a map fanatic, and when I read a military history book, if there's not good maps in it, I won't read it. I will read it if I can find a supplementary map to go with it. Maps are extremely important to understand what's happened. You can tell me all day this unit moved here and there, but if I can't see it on a map, it just doesn't process. That's just how my mind works. I was like, I bet there's a lot of people like that. And so I started out doing very small things. My first animated, I think, was Claiborne at Shiloh. So I was just looking at what Patrick Claiborne did at Shiloh, and it went off really well. And I also did it for people that have ancestors in the war. As a ranger, I get all kinds of questions of, "Hey, can you help me find my ancestor? I don't know what they did." And so I've been on Fold 3. I've looked through records of like, okay, here's your ancestor. They were in these battles. And I would highlight the the American Battlefield Trust maps. I'd go and print them off and highlight them. Hey, this is what they did. This is where they were. You can take this to the battlefield and be able to see where they were. And it just, I loved the American Battlefield Trust animated battle maps, but it didn't satisfy me enough because I wanted to see the regiments.
Yes.
I wanted to know who was down there. And I wanted to help people understand what their ancestor did. And that's what I wanted. I produce what I would want. It seems a little selfish, but I know there's other people like me out there. And whether I started the channel and I didn't care if anybody else watched, and I still don't ultimately care. I want people to enjoy it. But if you don't, hey, that's fine. I'm not going to cry about it. It's not for everyone. I enjoy doing it. I enjoy putting the animated battle maps together, and I'm happy to help people. And that's the main goal of this. If one person watches, I'm thrilled. I'm very surprised that anybody wants to listen to me most of the time, but apparently I do a decent job.
And you mentioned folks find their ancestors. I've told James this multiple times, but I had an ancestor who fought with the 110th Ohio at the Battle of the Wilderness and was killed on May 6th, 1864. And the Wilderness is the battle that I study the most. But your map showed when Gordon's flank attack hit, and I believe it was the evening of the 6th, the 110th Ohio fell back. They got busted up pretty bad, and that's probably when he got hit. I mean, we don't know the exact details, of course, but he was killed. He wasn't mortally wounded, as far as I know. And, I mean, we've been able to piece that together, my dad and I, through watching your animated map.
Yeah, that was one of my favorite ones to do because I know that I had trouble visualizing the wilderness and understanding what was going on. And if it would took me a while to understand what was going on, I can't imagine what it was for the soldiers that were actually fighting in it. But once I animate any battle, it's like, wow, it's very simple most of the time compared to what people make it out to be.
Yep.
And I know I've looked at other maps and looked at other battles and tried to envision what was happening, and it's very complicated on paper. But there's some battles that just don't have good maps, and so I'm having to take primary sources, I'm having to take other articles and books, and I'm trying to piece these things together. But I'm like, why can't we make it a little bit simpler? That's why I love the Savas and Beatty series on maps of insert battle here, and that's what I use a lot for my animated battle maps. But the wilderness is absolutely fascinating, and it's a lot of people wonder what's the turning point of the war. If it's not the wilderness, it may be Grant being put in command. I think that might be the turning point, because that's when everything changes. Gettysburg is okay; it's not a turning point. But when Grant gets taken to the east and put in command of all Union forces, that changes the game.
So you mentioned ancestors and things of that nature. Do you have any ancestors from the American Civil War?
Yes, I got both sides. I'm here in southwestern Virginia, right where Kentucky, Virginia, and Tennessee meet. So it's who knows which side your ancestor is going to go on when the war breaks out. Yeah. And so I had them on both sides. I had the most prominent one I have is my direct third great grandfather. He fought in the 25th Virginia Cavalry, and it started out as a partisan ranger unit. They operated here in southwestern Virginia. They did go out to Petersburg, but this was before. This was in September of '62, so this is before the siege of Petersburg ever happened. But he helped construct some fortifications here. He went out there in September. I think he stayed until December. So while Fredericksburg is happening, he's around Richmond. Then he gets sent back to southwestern Virginia, and he goes down and operates somewhere in East Tennessee. He's supposed to be somewhat attached to the Army of Tennessee, but then their unit is hard to follow sometimes when they're moving too rapidly and they're getting transferred back and forth. So they're somewhat involved with the Battle of Chickamauga, not directly. Then they get sent with Jubal Early. Actually, they're operating with Longstreet's cavalry while Longstreet's in East Tennessee. Then they go up in Jubal Early's Valley campaign, and that's basically where they kind of end. They come back into Western Virginia, do a little bit of skirmishing, but until the war ends, they just stay in southwestern Virginia. So that's the direct ancestor. And then I have one who was 16 years old. No, he was 18. He was 18 years old when he joined, and he joined here in southwestern Virginia. I mean, I live like 4 or 5 miles from where he was born and raised. And he signs up in the 2nd North Carolina Mounted Infantry. He walks all the way to Knoxville, Tennessee to muster in, which is roughly 60 miles from here.
Wow.
And the war ends. So he didn't see any combat, but he was technically a Union soldier. And then I had one ancestor that was in the 1st Tennessee Light Artillery. And he was stationed at Cumberland Gap, which is what I mostly write about and where I work at. He was stationed at Cumberland Gap, gets sick, gets sent to Camp Nelson, Kentucky, and he stays there. I assume he gets well and he becomes a steward of some sort in the hospital, but he doesn't leave that I can find. And so he doesn't see really much combat. The only ancestor I have that sees combat that I know of is the third great grandfather with the 25th Virginia Cavalry. but the other two are Union and one Confederate of direct lines. I have a few that are indirectly related.
I was gonna say, do you have any relation to the Lightning Brigade Wilder?
No,
No.
I've done the genealogy. I would have to go all the way back to England for us to come back. We are related, but you'd have to go all the way back to England to where we have a common ancestor.
Gotcha.
Yeah,
And
I love Wilder. He's a phenomenal general. He becomes a brevet general. He's a brilliant commander and revolutionizes a lot of what revolutionizes Civil War combat in many ways.
I know, obviously, know they were involved before and after Chickamauga, but just studying Chickamauga, and they were engaged there the 18th, 19th, and 20th. I think out of all the regiments there, I mean, I feel like they passed every test that was thrown at them at that battle.
They absolutely do. They are everywhere and anywhere they need to be.
Yeah.
And I think that's what they were designed for. They had a wonderful advocate in William S. Rosecrans who believed that was a proper way to implement mounted infantry and to have them Spencer repeating rifles. So with a supporter like Rosecrans, it was going to be a successful unit. And with Wilder being the commander, it made it even better.
Yeah.
And I always whenever I go down to Chickamauga, I always say, I've got to go to my tower since it's the Wilder Tower.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I think on the 20th, did they form a square? Like they were one of the few regiments that didn't flee the field when the Confederates broke through, or they were kind of isolated on the southern end?
It's a little contested of what they actually did there at the very end. But yes, they were supposed to have formed a square right there in, was it the Vineyard Field? I believe it is.
Yeah, somewhere in the south
Yeah, south end of the battlefield. They ultimately decide they need to pull back. Wilder claims that he was going to continue on and get into the rear of the Confederate Army. But again, we don't know exactly what was going to happen, but they ultimately fell back.
So, Dr. Wilder, I'm sure you've been to a lot of battlefields. Which one holds a special place in your heart?
I'll give the same answer I give when people ask me what's my favorite national park. Everyone is special in its own way. So I try to answer it of what battles do I like to go back to. You know, there's some that call me back. Gettysburg is like the Mecca for Civil War historians. You got to go to Gettysburg, and I go multiple times a year. I was just there on Sunday, and so I try to go. I try to go all the time, and I have the greatest wife in the world, who she's the one who asks me, when can we go back to Gettysburg? So, so I'm thankful for that. Gettysburg's very special to me. Chickamauga because it's so close to me. I love Shiloh for its wonderful preservation, but the one that, well, I guess there's two that I can just stand there and take it all in, and I'm in awe of what happened. One is Chickamauga. I love going to Chickamauga and kind of just, I go near dusky dark and just sit there, just soak it in. The other one's Stones River. I wish that Stones River was better preserved. But when you go to Stones River and you go to the slaughter pen and then move to the northeast, and you go through that cedar break and you come out into the open, right in front of you is the Nashville Pike. I get goosebumps. I'm getting the goosebumps right now, just thinking about how many Confederate soldiers tried to go across that field and how many Union soldiers ran into that field to find George Thomas there rallying the army. I mean, it's just a beautiful scene in any history book. And that place right there is extremely powerful, I think, and underrated. I think more people need to take notice of the Battle of Stones River. It is a critical battle of the war. And Rosecrans and Thomas don't get enough credit for that one battle. Thomas usually gets a lot of credit, but Rosecrans and Thomas need to have a little bit more credit for the Stones River. And that's one I love going to, and I go to at least once a year. I try to.
Obviously, you do a tremendous amount of research to build your maps. Have you ever gone to a place and be like, oh, wow, like this really opens my eyes as to what they did, or, maybe they were a little more over this way as opposed to where I put them?
I used to put the caveat, I haven't in a long time in videos. I try to put units as close to their original spots as possible. I'm not going to be able to do it exactly.
Mhm.
And so what I'm trying to do is give you an idea of what they did. Sometimes the records aren't exact, and you kind of sometimes I have to do my best estimate. And if that's the case, I either won't put a unit in if I don't know that they were in that specific attack, and I just kind of err on the side of caution. But I have been to a couple. Uh, one of them I had been to, and then I read a book that helped me better understand, and I had to change it kind of on the fly. Was the Battle of Fort Donelson? There was always and now I can't remember which unit it was, but there's a one of the first Union attacks that take place at Fort Donelson. It's supposed to have been taken on one side of the fort, but the way that they would have had to have gone would have been completely unreasonable. And from other accounts, it should have been from another side. And Timothy B. Smith, who's wrote countless books, and his book was the one I followed for the Battle of Fort Donelson, outlined why the spot on the battlefield is wrong. And so he kind of, so I have changed the trajectory of of those regiments that were supposed to have attacked that certain location. So that has changed. Gettysburg, I did Culp's Hill a few years ago before I started doing campaigns all in one big loop.
Mm-hmm.
I would just pick random spots and animate them. And Culp's Hill is one that changed as I looked at the field. I could see it on a map, but I actually did it more by understanding where, like I would pull up a map, like a Google Images, sorry, Google Maps,
Mm-hmm.
and you can see the markers along the road. And so I would actually place them as the markers are there a lot of times rather than putting them where the map showed me. There's not much difference, but I know the difference.
Mm-hmm.
You know, if you're just looking at it, you're probably not going to see any difference. But to me, there was a small, slight difference. I was like, I need to move them a little bit further south than what this map has, based on what the Google Maps showed and when I walked the field. And so that has changed a little bit. But for the most part, I use really good maps, and I use multiple maps. If there's a discrepancy, I have dove into the official records of the Union and Confederate armies, and like, I'm going to find out. Like I've had a few times where historians have been wrong about where a unit went. And the reason I knew they were wrong was because I was animating it. And I was like, that unit can't have done that. It was somewhere else. And so I've went into the records like, yes, that's exactly right. I've had a few moments like that.
Say you go to Shiloh and then you build a map about Shiloh and then you go back to Shiloh. Does your understanding change?
Oh yeah, a 1,000,000,000 times better do I understand the battles. I have a completely different perspective for battles that I have been to as the ones I have, or the ones I have animated as the ones I haven't. It does change an entire perspective, because if you go to a battlefield, and I think I have a unique perspective because I'm actually animating it and putting it together. You can watch my battle maps and get a great understanding of it, but me actually having to put units on the field makes me completely understand the battle a lot better. And I'll bring up my wife again. We'll go to a battlefield and we'll just park, and she'll say, "Okay, what happened? All right, let me try to paint a picture here for you." One I'm always always confuses me, and I've animated it and I still get a little confused, is the Battle of Antietam. It's the way that the army is facing that completely throws me off. And I don't even know how to explain it, but I'm going to hopefully redo the animation, and I'm hoping once I redo it, I'll get a little bit better. That is the only battle that I have trouble visualizing in my head, even after doing animated battle map for. The rest of them, oh, it made it so much clearer. It made Chickamauga so much better.
Oh yeah,
when I animated Chickamauga, that's what drives me. I go multiple times a year down there just to walk a different section. one unit I like to follow is what became famously Barksdale's brigade, but Barksdale gets mortally wounded at Gettysburg. And his unit, I stand at Gettysburg and I'm like, just in 3 months, they're going to be in Georgia.
Uh-huh.
And I love going to Chickamauga and seeing the Humphreys Brigade marker, because that's who takes over after Barksdale is killed. And so I like choosing a certain unit or a certain part of the battle when I go to these, especially ones I can go to multiple times a year, and just try to follow them. That makes it a lot more real. And since I did the animated battle maps, I can visualize it a lot better.
Oh yeah, I'm a huge visual person. So like I said, you can read something in a book, like, okay, they did this, and then you see like a static map. But then, when you bring these battles to life, oh, okay, that's the 6th Florida charging across Vineyard Field.
One of the best things I feel that I get personally out of these animated battle maps are when I go to a battlefield and I see like the Brotherton Field at Chickamauga, for instance, and I see that Straw's brigade is attacking through Brotherton Field. When I go to the battle, I can be like, all right, this is the size of a brigade, because I know from the animation that it was a little bit smaller than the field was. And so I can visualize a line of Confederates attacking across. And so I love that. Again, I talked a little bit before about me loving linear battle lines, and being able to understand the size of brigades is extremely helpful. I was just at Gettysburg Sunday, like I said, and I went to the bottom of Cemetery Hill, and I was looking at these regiments. Man, they were packed in there. They had been decimated through casualties, and they were fairly small at that point. But that's what makes the war more human to me, is seeing these units and understanding the loss of life, and how a group of 800 men at the beginning of the war whittles down to 200 or less, and seeing that represented on a battlefield is very powerful.
In your Civil War studies, is there a particular unit overall throughout the war that draws your interest?
Unit, do you want regiment, brigade, division?
Regiment. Yep.
Regiment. That one's a little bit tougher. I don't know if I have a specific regiment. One that I tried to recreate, actually, I did try to recreate two as far as a reenactor goes. One is the 21st Mississippi, which is in Barksdale's brigade. Yep. And I have found an image of a uniform that was in a museum, and it was supposed to have been worn at the Battle of Gettysburg. And so I tried to outfit myself to represent the 21st Mississippi. I like that unit quite a bit. And I like following a few of the Indiana regiments that are in Wilder's brigade. I've recreated a few of those outfits as well. But I'm much more concentrated on brigades and divisions.
Okay.
Those are the ones that I really love to follow. Whether it's Wilder's Lightning Brigade, I've went through Hoover's Gap and went through the Tullahoma campaign and kind of followed their route. I have wanted to. I love Claiborne's division. And Claiborne's division, walking where they've walked at or where they've defended, going to Tunnel Hill, not Tunnel Hill. Ringgold Gap.
Yes,
going to Ringgold Gap and seeing where he does. It's like the most amazing thing that I've ever heard of any commander doing. Especially when you see the landscape and the terrain, my goodness, how he's a genius that he's able to hold off the Union Army and let the wagons be rescued. So Claiborne's division, I'm a huge fan of General Greene. That's in the Union Army of the Potomac and defending Culp's Hill. And he gets, I think he gets horribly wounded outside of Chattanooga. Just a fantastic, very hard fighter. So I've tried to kind of follow him. I think it was like I said, it was after Brown's Ferry gets opened up along the Cracker Line, and he's with John W. Geary's division. And so I enjoy going and seeing General Greene's movements. And again, just knowing that a few months after Gettysburg, they're in Georgia, they're in Tennessee fighting these battles. Longstreet's Corps, I've followed them throughout. I actually am trying to develop a drive-in tour for Longstreet's East Tennessee campaign.
Very cool.
Nice.
So going from Knoxville and hitting all the major battles like Bean Station and Mossy Creek. And I haven't taken anybody, although there is a good friend of mine who started out as a fan and we've become close friends. I think I'm going to take him on the inaugural one, but I invite both of you, if you all are in East Tennessee, I'll happily take you on this developing tour that I've concocted in my head.
Yeah.
To show you how far these men traveled. And then the last unit I like following is the 7th Division of the Army of the Ohio. It was the first Union unit to capture Cumberland Gap. Nice. And trying to retrace how they came to Cumberland Gap and then their retreat back it's called a masterful retreat for a reason, going through the mountains of southeastern Kentucky, surviving on nothing but stagnant water and berries. It's a miraculous event that they do.
These men were a different breed, a different type of toughness.
Yep.
I tell you, when you hear about men getting wounded and continue fighting, I'm like, if I've got a little scrape, I'd have been out of commission. But these men kept fighting.
And the munitions that they're up against, these slow-moving, massive pieces of lead that are just shattering limbs, and then the conditions that they're enduring, the food that they're having to eat, and they go days without food. Some of them don't have shoes. It's just, I'm never not amazed when I'm reading and studying about these guys.
I like Shelby Foote's quote when he's asked, "Is there something you don't know about the Civil War?" He says, "How they did it."
Yeah,
that's something I don't know is how they did it.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm right there with them. I don't know how they did it. But again, it was a different time period, and people were used to different things.
Mm-hmm.
Not that they were used to starvation, but they were a little bit more accepting of it, I think, sometimes. It's like when I talk to people about Daniel Boone and the westward movement of hundreds of thousands of settlers in Kentucky, I always try to remind them that that's what they were used to. They were used to traveling long distances. They didn't know any different. This is normal life to them. It's like 200 years from now, I guarantee they're going to say, "Can you believe they drove to Walmart? How dangerous that is," kind of thing. So I try to put it in perspective, not saying that they didn't do amazing things or they weren't amazing people, but for them, it was normal, just like stuff we do today is normal.
Yeah, well, like you said, life was just generally harder back then than it is today, and that's the natural progression of technology and society advancing, things like that.
Exactly.
As far as current projects on your channel, you mentioned Gettysburg. Has there been anything as you're making these maps? Has anything popped out to you or stuck with you, or maybe change your perspective on some of these topics?
Yes, and I'm not going to go in the direction you might think I'm going to go. I have done all these animated battle maps, and I kept coming back, particularly with the Battle of the Wilderness. This has been a germ of an idea for about a year and a half of how generals used sunlight as a weapon, how they used the sun as a weapon. And I just wrote my first conference paper with it, with that as a subject. I've wrote plenty of conference papers. That was the first one I've wrote with that topic. And I went to the Virginia Forum up in Shenandoah University in Winchester, Virginia this past weekend. That's why I was up there. And I was going up to Gettysburg for a few moments. And it got a wonderful reception.
Awesome.
And so I'll briefly go into it here. The Civil War happens outside, and the sun can be your best friend or your biggest enemy. And Civil War generals were very in tune with the natural world. They knew what they could use the natural world to their benefit, and they could see what could be their detriment. So let's take the Battle of the Wilderness just for the example. It's one of the best ones and one of the best examples I have at the moment. I'm still actively doing research, but this is something that came out of my animated battle maps. When Gordon is trying to make this attack on the Union right flank, he complains up until the day he dies. He needed more time in the day to launch this attack. But General Ewell and General Jubal Early, both of them are saying we don't need to attack just yet. Early doesn't believe it's actually worth worth attacking. But Yule is intrigued, and apparently Yule says this, that the reason it was done at the end of the day, dusk, getting ready to be dusk, is one, it prevented the enemy from seeing that we were sending so few troops to that flank, or that we were sending troops at all to that flank. It was dark enough that it would have kept them from acknowledging that. And anytime you're going to be fighting with an inferior force against a superior force, you need to attack it near dusk or dark, because one, when you attack, the enemy can't see how many enemy there are, and it increases the confusion, as Jubal early says. And if you attack near dusky dark and you're not successful, then the enemy has less of an opportunity to counterattack. So, I mean, they are using the environment as a weapon, and particularly the sun. And that's just one example that I found. And out of all those animated battle maps, and I keep on looking, and I'm finding it in every battle. There's something about sunlight. There's something about using the sun in some way. And that's one of the biggest things that have come out of it. And it's now, with my academic career, and it was extremely well received at the Virginia Forum. They said, we think you're on to something. And so hopefully it'll be turned into a journal article soon, and then eventually be turned into a book. That's the idea.
Going back to the weather conversation earlier, just so overlooked because we get caught up in the linear formations, and they were here, the monuments, and yeah, that's fantastic.
Certain aspects that you don't think about in terms of Civil War combat, and especially like you mentioned, I mean, potentially that attack could have been when my ancestor was killed, because his unit broke apart there because of Gordon's flank attack.
It was all because of sunlight.
Yep.
and how they used it. Yeah, that's what I've been diligently looking into, and I've just recently found a reference to it at the Battle of Gettysburg and the attack on Cemetery Hill on the second day. And I was extremely excited. I'm the next Confederate general I cover in my biography series. As you know, I have a animated battle map series that comes out every Tuesday, and a biography that comes out every Friday. And I'm doing General Ewell next. Nice. And I'm in the battle. I've just wrapped up the Battle of Gettysburg, and there was one little comment in the book that I'm reading for it, and it was Harry Hayes mentioning sunlight. I was like, I got to go into the official records. I was like, this is perfect. This is exactly what I needed. And so I'm finding it gradually, and I'm super excited about that.
Since we're brushing Gettysburg, a lot of the night fighting that took place on East Cemetery Hill, Culp's Hill, did you find anything in your studies? Obviously, their vision was affected, but did you find that benefited or hurt one side more than the other?
It actually, from what I can tell, it benefited the Confederate attack. That's what Harry Hayes says, the commander of the Louisianians that attacked Cemetery Hill that night. He said if it wasn't for lack of sunlight, we would have been slaughtered. Mm-hmm. But the lack of sunlight allowed him to get close enough to break through at multiple points along Cemetery Hill. And they captured artillery pieces. I mean, you go to the bottom of Cemetery Hill and you look up where they attacked. That is a massive, massive success just to get up the hill, let alone capture a few things. And so he claims that it was lack of sunlight that allowed it. And some generals are claiming that Ewell waited that late to attack on purpose so that his troops could do that. So again, these are tactics that are not written down. Mm-hmm. This isn't in Jomini. This isn't in Dennis Hartmahan's handbook. This is just men that know what daylight and darkness does for a battlefield.
That field in front of Stevens Knoll there, there's no cover there. So it would make sense that they use that darkness to try and at least get in a little closer.
To touch on your biography series really quick, is there I've had the pleasure of watching most of them. Is there a biography that you learned or took away a lot more than you knew about the gentleman that you were discussing?
Yeah, the one that changed my entire perspective, and he's become either my number one or my number two favorite, is George Thomas, the Rock of Chickamauga. That ultimately changed my entire perspective on him and the war was that the book on him that I read to be in preparation for that. And to know that he was a young child when the Nat Turner Rebellion happened. And I mean, he was a slave owner for most of his life. And throughout the entire war, he slowly changes. And I respect his humility. I respect his honesty and his loyalty. When he's asked, he's trying to start the National Cemetery that's at Chattanooga, and one of his aides comes up and says, "Do you want me to, bury these soldiers by state?" He says, "No, mix them up. I'm tired of states' rights." I mean, that's a powerful statement.
Wow.
And then by the Battle of Nashville, he's defeated John Bell Hood at the Battle of Nashville. And he's walking over the battlefield and he sees that the black troops that fought made it just as far as the white troops did in the attacks. And he turns to his staff and says, "Gentlemen, that settles it. Blacks will fight." And he fights for civil rights after the war, trying to improve their lives. I mean, he has a complete 180. He goes from slave owner to civil rights advocate, like in the space of about 4 years. And that's probably the most impactful biography I've done, hands down.
Wow.
And he's a good friend.
Mm-hmm.
Like he's after the Battle of Perryville and Don Carlos Buell's getting removed from command of the Army of the Ohio, they want to give it to Thomas, and he doesn't want to take it from his friend. And so they give it to someone else. He's maybe a little too loyal to some extent, but he didn't want to ruffle anybody's feathers. Privately, he was like, "Yeah, I should." When he gets promoted within the regular army, he says, "I should have had this after Chickamauga, not near the end of the war."
Mm-hmm.
So it's not that he doesn't value what he does, but he does have a lot of humility. And I just admire him more and more. And there's a great little story. I think it's on the Atlanta campaign, and him and Jefferson C. Davis, one of the division commanders, they're picking blackberries or some kind of berry, and some Confederate skirmishers start firing at them. Well, everybody else runs and tries to get out of the way. Here's George. He's finishing eating and he's just walking leisurely back to the Union lines. Everybody thought he was a very brave man, but in reality, we probably know that he had a horrible back. He had hurt his back right as the war began. He fell off a train station depot little platform and hurt his back. And so it was probably not that he was brave. It's like he can't walk that fast. And so what was perceived as bravery is probably just pain. But nevertheless, he got a big reputation for stuff like that. And yeah, George Thomas is, again, him and J.E.B. Stuart are my top two. They trade back and forth depending on the day.
Nice.
Today it might be Thomas, tomorrow it might be Stuart, but I love both of them.
Well, speaking of your magical voice and your incredible beard, and now we're on the topic of J.E.B. Stuart. We got the talking before we hit record here. Tell us about your reenacting realm and who you portray.
Yeah, I'm lucky enough that in 2019, I was asked to replace the old J.E.B. Stuart, who had been doing it for quite a few years, and become the new J.E.B. Stuart for the J.E.B. Stuart birthplace. And I am officially recognized as the official J.E.B. Stuart for the birthplace and am sanctioned by the family, the J.E.B. Stuart family. So
Wow.
both people want me to be him, represent him. They think I represent him truthfully and honestly. And I don't pull any punches when I talk about J.E.B. I'm very honest as J.E.B., and I try to portray him as much as possible. I read documents and try to get the words that he uses and try to become him as much as possible. And I do a lot of presentations as J.E.B. Stuart. And so I go into first person and try to channel him as best as possible. And I always tell people, if you're wanting campaigns and battles, probably not the best one for me to do. Probably not great advisable for me to come to you and speak to you, because when I portray J.E.B, I portray all the stories that are around him, all the fun stuff he got into. There's some sad stories in there, but I'll talk about campaigns and what J.E.B Stuart did. But man, the stories outside of those campaigns could fill multiple books and have. And so I love portraying J.E.B Stuart. He's a fascinating character, and he's just controversial enough that it draws people in, because most people automatically think Gettysburg, he's riding up north getting his name in the papers. That gets thrown around all the time, and I love fighting back against that. Does he have faults? Absolutely, he has tons of faults, but he really was the last cavalier. Along with him, I do represent a Unionist from East Tennessee that a lot of people probably haven't heard of. His name is Daniel Ellis. He was known as the Red Fox. He has a red beard just like me. So I portray him every now and then as well. And he is a conductor to get East Tennessee Unionists out of East Tennessee and get them into Kentucky to enlist in the Army. And so I talk about all those many journeys. He took over multiple mountains, hundreds of miles this man traveled, nearly getting captured by Confederates, nearly getting killed, shot at. This man did everything you can imagine as secretly as possible. And so Daniel Ellis, if you ever get a chance to read about him, he wrote his own book that is, I try to portray him as if I am him as much as possible, and he will tell the most outlandish stories. There's some that are probably not true in his book, but it's called The Thrill and Adventures of Daniel Ellis is the name of the book. And there are thrill and adventures in there. Some I'm like, yeah, I don't know if they're true, but I still tell the story because that's what he would have done. But I do put it the caveat at the end. It's like, maybe some of these stories may be a little embellished, but many of them are right on the head, or hit them right on the head. So I do those two are the only ones I portray. I'm thinking about trying to do General Hood. He had a red beard, but yeah. I don't want to cut off an arm and a leg to represent. Well, not an arm. He still kept his arm, but I think I was thinking about maybe doing Hood and another Union general as well. But right now it's just Stuart and Daniel Ellis.
Well, I think you nailed them.
Yeah. Well, thank you,
Andrew.
One of the last questions I have for you, Dr. Wilder, is I'll go back to the maps for a second. Have you ever thought about doing a series, an animated series on units or brigades or anything like that throughout the Civil War, like traversing them from their first engagement till their last, maybe?
I haven't thought about it in the context of an animated battle map, but I have thought about it as kind of a biography of the unit.
Nice. Yeah.
And so it would take the place of like the general biographies that I do and do a unit biography. So I have thought about that, and I've actively grabbed books about units to start that.
That
right now, cool. I don't have the time to do it, but eventually I think I will. One of the first, I'm trying to remember now, is it there's a unit out of Chicago. There are a bunch of meat packers, I think, or is it the Corn Exchange? One of these units, it's an odd Union unit that I've got interested in. I grabbed a book and was like, I will eventually do it, do the biography for them. But yes, I have thought about it and I'm trying to actively do that if I can find time.
That would be really cool.
Well, Dr. Wilder, we've had you for about an hour now. We're grateful for your time. On the slim chance that our followers somehow don't follow you, where can they find you and your content?
The best thing to do is just go to historygonewilder.com and it'll take you to the YouTube channel. And then there's all the links on the main page to all the social medias and my Teespring store. I come up with different designs about once a month, really. And so you can buy a neat t-shirt. I've got one on right now. I don't know if you can see it. It's called Bacon's Rebellion. And you got the bacon fighting the eggs. So I try to come up with a different design every year and every month. And so new stuff all the time. But yeah, just historygonewilder.com is the best way to see all my stuff.
And your new episodes, Battlefield Maps, are Tuesdays and biographies are Fridays?
Yes, and I have started a new series. It's not really a series, but it's just random stories that I find that I want to share with people. It can be 1 minute, it can be 5 minutes, but it's quick. It's really quick, neat little Civil War stories and history stories. They come out on Sunday mornings at 6 a.m. So, but like I said, just there. And if I don't know when this episode will come out, but this Sunday will be about a zombie at the Battle of Gettysburg.
Oh,
so I'll throw that little tease in there.
Perfect.
Nice.
Dr. Wilder, I thank you so much for your time. You're a busy guy, and the fact that you came on just to talk Civil War with Andrew and I, we're grateful for you. I really enjoyed our Chickamauga talk, so maybe we'll have you back on for an anniversary episode or something.
Sure, absolutely. I'm always in the mood to talk Civil War, so if y'all want to have me back on, I'm happy to do it.
All right.
Thank you, Dr. Wilder, for hopping on tonight.
Oh, you're very welcome.
Subscribe now to the Distant Drums podcast and march with us from Fort Sumter to Appomattox, because history doesn't just echo, it marches on.